My fiancé called off our wedding in front of his entire family at Sunday dinner, slid the ring box across the table like he was returning a defective product, and said, "Your mom showed me who you really were." And she was right. I picked up the ring box, put it in my purse, and asked his aunt if she wanted the last bread roll. 3 weeks later, that ring, the one he said meant forever, was sitting in an evidence pile that his own mother helped me build. So let me back up. Marcus and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party when I was 26. He was the guy who refilled my drink without being asked and remembered I mentioned I hated cilantro 20 minutes later when we ordered food. You know how rare that is? I thought I'd hit the jackpot. I genuinely did. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. 2 years of what I thought was something solid. We cooked together on Sundays, like actually cooked, not just ordered in and pretended. He'd do the chopping because he knew I always cut myself. I'd do the seasoning because his palate was, bless his heart, aggressively mediocre. We had a system. We had inside jokes. We had a savings account we'd started together for a house deposit, $14,200 in there by the time this all went down. The proposal itself was at this little rooftop restaurant we'd gone to on our first real date. Nothing over the top. Just us, a good bottle of wine, and a ring he'd clearly put thought into, my grandmother's style, Art Deco, the kind I'd pointed to once in a museum gift shop catalog 8 months before. I cried. Real tears. The ugly kind. I should have paid more attention to the red flags. But you know how it is when you're in it. Everything that should have been a warning sign just gets filed under quirks I love about him. Like the fact that Marcus talked to his mother Diane every single day. And I mean every single day. Sometimes twice. I thought it was sweet at first. He's close with his family. How lovely. What I didn't clock was that those calls weren't just check-ins. They were debriefs. He'd hang up, and sometimes his whole energy would shift, like he'd logged on to a different version of himself. I noticed it. I filed it under, "He's just a mama's boy. It's fine." Or the way Diane would make these little comments. Never big enough to call out. Always deniable. The first Thanksgiving I went to, she looked at my dress, which was a perfectly normal burgundy wrap dress. I'd spent $89 on it. I remember because I debated it for 20 minutes at the register, and she said, "Oh, that's festive. Just festive." With that pause before it. Like she'd filtered out the actual words she wanted to use. Marcus laughed it off. "She's just old-fashioned," he told me on the drive home. I let it go. Or the time I got promoted at work. I'm a UX designer, and I'd just been made lead on a pretty significant project. And when I told them at dinner, Diane said, "Oh, how ambitious of you," in the exact tone someone uses when they mean, "Oh, how inconvenient for everyone around you." I let that go too. I had a whole storage unit of red flags I just let go. The thing is, Marcus never backed me up in those moments. Not once, not directly. He'd always smooth it over afterward. "She didn't mean it like that," or "She's warming up to you." I promise. But he never turned to his mother in the moment and said, "Hey, that wasn't cool." Not once in 2 years. I told myself that was just how he kept the peace. Past me was such an idiot. The engagement was 8 months in when things started getting genuinely weird. Diane had started calling me more. Which sounds nice, right? It wasn't. She'd call to help plan the wedding. But every conversation somehow circled back to something I'd supposedly said or done. "Marcus mentioned you don't want his cousins at the rehearsal dinner." I had never said that. I didn't even know which cousins she meant. "He said you're thinking of changing the venue." We'd had one passing conversation about whether the original venue had good parking. Small stuff. But it was constant. And when I'd bring it up to Marcus, he'd get this look, this specific look where he'd press his lips together and say, "I just don't think you two are communicating well, babe. Maybe try harder. Try harder." His mother was actively rewriting my words and feeding them back to him, and I needed to try harder. I started keeping a notes app log of what I actually said versus what Diane apparently reported. Yes, really. No, it's not paranoid when someone is actually doing it. That notes app would come back around later, you guys. Spoiler. Kind of. Stay with me. Okay. So, the Sunday dinner. It was supposed to be a normal family dinner. Marcus's whole immediate family, Diane, his dad Robert, his sister Claire, Claire's husband Tom, and their 2 kids. And me. We did these maybe once a month. I'd started bringing dessert. Because it was the one contribution Diane couldn't critique. Since she didn't make dessert herself. I brought a chocolate layer cake from the bakery down the street. $34. I remember that specifically because I'd also considered just buying flowers and decided the cake was more thoughtful. I would later deeply regret the $34 cake. Dinner was fine at first. Normal family dinner noise. The kids were being feral in that endearing way. Robert was telling a story about a guy at his golf club. Claire kept refilling everyone's wine, which in retrospect was either a coincidence or she knew something was coming and was pre-coping. Then Diane said very calmly, like she was commenting on the weather, "I spoke to your mother this week, sweetheart." And something cold went through me. Because my mother, and I will get to my mother in a moment, was not someone Diane should have been speaking to. They'd met exactly twice. They did not have a relationship. They should not have been having phone calls. I looked at Marcus. He was looking at his plate. "Oh," I said. "MHM," Diane said. She was very illuminating. And Marcus put down his fork. And he looked at me. And I saw it in his face before he even opened his mouth. This had been decided. Whatever this was, it had already been decided. And this dinner was the sentencing, not the trial. "I think we need to talk about the wedding," he said. His sister Claire put her fork down too. The kids kept eating because they're children and they didn't know everything was about to implode. "Okay," I said very carefully. "I've been thinking," he said, and he reached into his jacket pocket. His jacket pocket. You guys, he'd come to this dinner with the ring box already in his pocket, and he set it on the table. "I think we moved too fast. I think there are things about you I didn't fully know." The ring box sat between us like a grenade. "Your mom showed me who you really were," he said. And she was right. Dead silence. Robert suddenly found something very interesting to look at on the wall. Claire's mouth was slightly open. Diane looked, and I want to be precise here, satisfied. Not smug. Not gloating. Satisfied, the way someone looks when a long project has finally concluded. I looked at that ring box. I looked at Marcus. And something in me went completely, eerily calm. I picked up the ring box. I put it in my purse. I reached for my wine glass, took a sip, and turned to Robert. "Robert," I said, "you were saying something about the guy at the golf club?" Claire made a sound like a small animal. Marcus said my name. I didn't respond. Robert, to his absolute credit and eternal legend status in my personal history, stumbled through another 2 sentences of his golf story before Diane cut across with, "I think you two should talk." "Sure," I said. "Claire, did you want the last bread roll?" I was not okay. I want to be very clear that I was not okay. The calm was not peace. It was the specific stillness you get when your brain is processing something so enormous it temporarily suspends all other functions. I was not being brave. I was being buffering. Marcus and I went outside on the porch. He talked for a while. Something about trust and his mother's concerns and how he just needed time to think, and wasn't this better now than after the wedding? I heard the words. I processed almost none of them. What I was mostly doing was trying to identify what lie my mother had told him, because whatever she'd said, it was a lie. My mother and I had been mostly no contact for 8 months. This is the part one need to explain. My mother, Carol, is what you'd call a complicated woman if you were being charitable, and a destructive narcissist if you'd spent 30 years in her orbit. She has never, not once in my adult life, been happy about anything I achieved. Promotion? Don't let it go to your head. Nice apartment? Must be nice to be so frivolous. Engaged to a good man? What does he even see in you, I wonder? We'd had a blowout fight 8 months before this dinner. She'd said something unforgivable about Marcus, ironically, and I'd told her she wouldn't be involved in the wedding planning. We weren't completely cut off, but we weren't close. I told Marcus all of this. He'd met my mother 3 times and had himself commented that she was a lot. So the idea that he was now treating her word as the truth about my character was, and I mean this specifically, insane. "What did she tell you?" I asked him, finally, on that porch. He listed things. Things I apparently had said about his family. Things I apparently had planned to do with the joint savings account. Things about how I'd used him to get to a better apartment situation. It was like listening to a fanfiction about myself. None of it was real. All of it was specific enough to sound plausible to someone who wanted to believe it. "Marcus," I said, "none of that is true." "She had texts," he said, and there it was. "Show me," I said. He showed me his phone, and I saw what my mother had sent, screenshots of texts from me that were almost right, just slightly off, like someone who'd gotten 80% of my texting style and filled in the rest. The timestamps were wrong on 2 of them. One of them referenced a conversation that had happened months before the date on the screenshot. And one of them, the most damaging one, the one about using him, had a turn of phrase I have never used in my life. I don't use the word leverage in casual texts. I just don't. But I was standing on a porch in January, and my fiancé had just returned my engagement ring in front of his family, and I didn't have any of this in front of me yet. All I had was the dull certainty that my mother had done something vicious, and that Marcus had let her. I'm going to go home, I said. We should talk about this. We will, I said, but not tonight. I went back inside. I got my coat. I hugged Claire, which surprised her enough that she hugged me back really hard and didn't let go for a second too long. I thanked Diane for dinner in a voice so polite it could have etched glass. I said goodbye to Robert, who looked like a man who wished he could become the wall he'd been staring at. I drove home. I made it to my couch, and then I completely fell apart. Not the pretty movie crying. The other kind. The kind where you're on your kitchen floor at some point and you don't entirely know how you got there. I cried for 2 hours. I ate an embarrassing amount of toast because I'd left the cake at their house, and I had no real food, and toast is what you make when you are too destroyed to think. I called my best friend Dara and sobbed at her for 45 minutes. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Dara said, when I finally ran out of words. This is not over. Okay, this is just the first scene. I didn't know what that meant yet. I was about to find out. Dara came over the next morning with coffee and a focused energy that I recognized from the time she'd helped me dispute a $600 billing error with my landlord. She meant business. Tell me everything your mother sent him, she said. I told her what I'd seen on his phone. She listened with her eyes slightly narrowed and her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. The timestamps were off, she said. On 2 of them. And you've never used the word leverage. Not in a casual text. No, maybe in a work email. Do you have your actual text with Marcus? Everything. I did. I have everything. I'm a digital hoarder. It's a character flaw, and it was about to be incredibly useful. We went through them. All of it. 2 years of texts. And you guys, there was not a single message in that entire thread that even vaguely resembled what my mother had sent him. Not in content, not in tone, not in vocabulary. Someone made these, Dara said flatly. I know. Does your mom even know how to fake screenshots? And that was the question. Because Carol is not technically sophisticated. She's a 58-year-old woman who still calls everything on her phone the app. Making convincing fake screenshots would require a level of effort that seemed beyond her. Unless someone helped her. Dara and I looked at each other. Diane, I said. Dara pointed at me like I'd gotten the answer on a game show. Here's the thing that clicked into place. Diane had been calling Carol. Not just once. When I texted my mom. Yes, I texted my mom. I needed information, don't at me, and asked her directly what had happened. She called me back in about 4 minutes, which told me she'd been expecting my call. She was almost prepared. Diane reached out to me a few months ago, my mother said. She sounded equal parts defensive and, underneath it, something else. Something that might have been regret. She said she was worried about you. That she'd seen some concerning texts between you and Marcus. She showed me things you'd apparently said about me. And this was the part that broke my brain a little, because what did she show you? Silence. Mom. She showed me texts, Carol said quietly. Texts you'd supposedly sent Marcus about me, saying I was an embarrassment. That you'd cut me off because I was holding you back. That you'd told his family things about me. I sat down very slowly. I never said any of that. I know that, she said. And then, smaller. I know that now. But I was angry. And Diane was telling me you were saying these things. And it lined up with how things had been between us. And you believed her. Yes. So here's what Diane had done. Because I want you to understand the architecture of this. She had fabricated texts from me to my mother, telling Carol I was embarrassing her. She had fabricated texts from me to Marcus, telling him I was using him. She had played both sides, poisoning my relationship with my own mother, then using my mother's resulting bitterness as a weapon against my engagement. She'd handed Carol ammunition and pointed her at Marcus. Carol, who was already hurt and angry and had no reason to disbelieve it, had done exactly what Diane needed her to do. It was genuinely impressive in the most awful way. Like watching someone play three-dimensional chess and realizing they'd said it. All up 6 months ago. I should have called you, Carol said. I should have asked you first. I'm sorry, I don't want to make my mother a hero of this story because she's not. She had her own history of believing bad things about me before checking with me. First, and this wasn't the first time, but in this moment, she was trying. And what she said next was the thing that changed everything. Diane asked me to write things out, she said. In my own words. She said she was trying to show Marcus what she'd found. She sent me drafts. I edited them and sent them back. She sent you drafts? Yes. Do you still have them? Pause. Yes. I kid you not, I nearly dropped my phone. Carol had the drafts. The original drafts Diane had sent her. In Diana's own handwriting, in Diane's iCloud email. Because she'd sent them through email and not some untraceable app, were the fabricated messages. Before they'd been cleaned up and screenshotted. My mother had the receipts. I'm going to pause here and tell you something true. When I found out that Carol had the emails, I went to my bathroom, turned on the shower so Dara wouldn't hear me, and cried again. Not the floor crying from the night before. Something different. The kind of crying that happens when something shifts. When you realize the story isn't what you thought it was. When you realize you've been fighting. On two fronts without knowing it, and that's why you felt so impossibly outgunned. My own mother had been weaponized against me by my future mother-in-law, and neither of them had bothered to just pick up the phone and talk to me. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not the betrayal from Diane, which was calculated. The almost betrayal from Carol, which was just fear and old wounds and bad judgment. I'm not going to say it didn't hurt. It devastated me. But I also knew my mother, and I knew that when she was hurt and felt justified, she didn't question the narrative she was handed. She'd done it to me before. That's why we'd been barely speaking. And knowing that, Diane had used it like a key. I dried my face. I went back out to Dara. She has the emails, I said. Dara put her coffee down very slowly and carefully. How many? Enough. We didn't have to say much after that. Dara is the kind of friend who helps you do the thing, not the kind who talks about doing the thing. She poured more coffee. She pulled out her laptop. What's your plan? She asked. And this was where I had to make a decision. Because there were several options. I could send the emails to Marcus directly and let him draw his own conclusions. But Marcus had already chosen to believe his mother once, and I wasn't certain a second confrontation one-on-one would go any differently. His defense mechanisms would activate. He'd find a way to minimize it. Or I could do what Diane had done. Use the dinner table. Use the audience. Petty? Maybe. But Diane had made the opening move in a room full of witnesses. I thought it was only fair that the closing move happened in the same place. I need Claire, I said. Claire was not surprised when I called her. She picked up on the second ring, and the first thing she said was, I've been waiting for you to call. That told me a lot. Claire had had suspicions for a while. Not proof, but the kind of unease that builds when you know your mother is capable of certain things, and you've seen her steer situations before. She'd watched what happened at dinner, and she'd had that specific expression I now recognized as someone watching a move play out, not witnessing a spontaneous event. She's done something like this before, Claire told me. Not this big, but manipulating situations. Steering Marcus. He doesn't see it because she's always been the person he trusts most. Are you willing to help me? And this was the moment with Claire, the real one. Because loyalty versus honesty is the specific war that tears families apart, and I was asking her to take a side in a way that couldn't be undone. She's my mother, Claire said, and I love her. But what she did to you isn't. I can't be quiet about this and look at myself in the mirror, she paused. Yes, tell me what you need. Claire had something of her own. She'd found a draft text on Diane's phone 2 weeks before the Sunday dinner. She hadn't understood what she was looking at the time. It was a message being composed to someone she didn't recognize, containing language that seemed copied from somewhere. She'd photographed it because it felt wrong, even if she couldn't say why. When she texted it to me, I compared it to the screenshots my mother had shared. It was the source. I called Carol back and told her what we had. She forwarded me the emails that same afternoon. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. I want to be there, she said. When this happens, wherever this happens, I want to look Diane in the face. Past me would have said no. Past me would have kept the complications separate. But something in me recognized that this was my mother trying to do the one thing that might actually matter, show up. Okay, I said. I texted Marcus 3 days after the dinner. I told him I had new information and asked if we could meet as a family. His response was carefully warm, the kind of warmth people deploy when they want to manage you. He said, of course, Maybe next Sunday dinner. Let's talk everything through. I said that sounded perfect. I did not tell him who else would be at that dinner. I wore the burgundy wrap dress, the one Diane had called festive at Thanksgiving. Yes, on purpose. No, I'm not sorry. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. Marcus picked me up from my apartment, which I thought was interesting. He'd offered, and I'd said yes, because I figured maintaining the impression that this was a reconciliation conversation was useful. In the car, he was trying to be gentle with me, asking how I was doing, saying he'd done a lot of thinking, saying he wanted us to find a way through this. I said MMHM and definitely in the right places and watched the city go by out the window. I'm glad you reached out, he said. I think we can figure this out. I think so too, I said. I had the notes app open in my coat pocket. I had the emails forwarded to a folder on my phone. I had Carol's confirmation that she'd be arriving 20 minutes after us. I had Claire on the inside. We walked into the house, and it smelled like pot roast, and the kids were already destroying something in the living room, and Robert was watching TV and Diane was in the kitchen. Diane saw me walk in, and her expression did something complicated. A flicker quickly smoothed over that I wouldn't have caught if I hadn't been watching for it. Oh, she said pleasantly. You came. I did, I said. Wonderful. And then, with that specific smile, we'll get everything sorted out. She'd said that to me before, at the second time we'd ever met. I'd almost forgotten it. We'll get everything sorted out was apparently her phrase for situations she intended to control. It was the first time I heard it. The second time hit differently. Dinner was set for 6:30. At 6:22 my phone buzzed. Carol, I'm outside. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I texted Claire. She's here. Claire appeared in the hallway a moment later, like she'd been waiting, which she had been. I'm getting her, I murmured. Claire nodded. She went back to the dining room. I went to the front door and let my mother in. Carol was wearing a dark blazer and had her phone in her hand and looked like a woman who had been thinking about this moment for days, which she had. She looked at me and I looked at her, and there was a whole conversation in that 3 seconds that we probably needed to have properly at some point, but not tonight. Ready? I said. Yes, she said. We walked into the dining room together. The silence was the best part. I want to be precise about this silence. It wasn't dramatic, movie pause silence. It was the silence of 8 people in a room having 8 different private realizations simultaneously. Marcus's face went from confused to alarmed. Diane's face went to a place I can only describe as controlled calculation before she shifted to warm surprise, because she was fast. Carol, she said, like this was a happy coincidence. What a surprise. I thought it would be, my mother said. Robert stood up slightly, the way men of his generation do, which would have been sweet under any other circumstances. The kids looked up from their food for approximately 1 second and went back to eating. I sat down. My mother sat down next to me. I'm glad everyone's here, I said calmly, because I think there are some things that need to be addressed, and it's better that they happen with everyone present. Marcus was looking at me like he'd walked into a room expecting a conversation and found a courtroom. What's going on? Your mother has been in contact with my mother, I said, which I didn't know about. I'd like to show everyone what that contact looked like. I put my phone on the table. On the screen was the email chain, Diane's original drafts, sent to Carol, containing the fabricated messages. I slid it toward Marcus. Diane said, and this was the exact phrase, "Now let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be," which was a very interesting thing to say before she'd even seen what was on the screen. Marcus picked up the phone. He read. His jaw tightened. Claire, I said, do you want to share what you found? Claire had clearly also been sitting with this for days, because she pulled out her own phone without hesitation and put it on the table. The photograph she'd taken of the draft on Diane's screen. I found this on your phone, Mom, Claire said. 2 weeks ago. I didn't know what it meant then. Diane's composure cracked. Just slightly. A hairline fracture, but real. That's not, she started. And I'd like my mom to share what she received, I said. Carol opened her phone. The emails. The drafts. The back and forth with Diane's email address in the header of every single one. The room was very quiet. Marcus, Diane said, and her voice shifted, not the management tone, but something rawer underneath it. This is being taken completely out of context. What's the context? He said. He wasn't looking at her. He was still looking at the phone. What's the context for drafting messages and sending them to her mother? I was trying to protect you. From what? From a girl who wasn't right for you. And there it was. Not from something she did, or from a lie I uncovered. From a girl who wasn't right. Which had been the premise all along. Diane had decided the conclusion and then manufactured the evidence. And now, in front of her husband and both her children and her daughter-in-law and the woman she'd recruited, she was saying it out loud. Marcus put the phone down. He looked at his mother. "You fabricated these," he said. It wasn't a question. "I was trying to protect our family." "You fabricated texts," he said. "And you sent them to her mother. And her mother sent them to me. And I called off my engagement in front of everyone based on—" He stopped, ran a hand over his face. "You made me do that. I didn't make you do anything. You made a choice. Based on fake evidence you created." Diane looked around the table, at Robert, who was staring at his plate, at Claire, who was not looking away, at Carol, who was absolutely looking her dead in the eye, at the kids, who had gone quiet in that way children do when they sense something serious without understanding it. And then Diane did something I didn't expect. Her face crumpled, briefly, almost real, almost sympathetic, and she said quietly, "I just didn't think she was right for you." "You didn't get to decide that," Marcus said. "That was mine to decide. Somebody had to. I'm an adult, Mom. You were making a mistake. That was mine to make." His voice, finally, broke through. He never yelled. In 2 years, I'd never heard Marcus raise his voice at his mother. The kids flinched slightly. Even Robert looked up. Diane looked, and I want to be precise, small. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely small. Not because Marcus had yelled at her, but because the room, all of it, all the people in it, were looking at her and not finding what she'd expected to find there. "I was protecting you," she said, and it came out quiet and desperate and wrong. "I'm always protecting you. Your whole life, I have." "You went behind my back," he said. "You went behind her back. You involved her mother. You manipulated. This wasn't protecting me. This was controlling me." And then he did the thing that made the whole table hold its breath. He picked up my ring box, which he'd had in his jacket again, and he placed it in front of me on the table. "I'm sorry," he said to me, quietly, genuinely. I looked at the ring box. Diane said, "Marcus, I think you should go home," he told her. And for a moment I thought he was talking to me, but he was looking at his mother. "Tonight. I think I need some space from you tonight." Diane stood up. She looked at me. Just once, for just a moment. And what I saw wasn't the controlled woman from dinner, or even the crumbling woman from a moment ago. It was something older and more complicated. Something that knew it had been seen. Then she walked out. Robert followed her, not without giving Marcus a long look and me a small nod, which was the most Robert had ever communicated to me directly and somehow meant a lot. Claire exhaled slowly. The kids went back to their pot roast. Carol reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I picked up the ring box, turned it over, put it back down. "I don't know," I said, simply, to Marcus. "I don't know if I can." He didn't say anything. He nodded, like he understood that was the only honest answer. I'd come to this dinner to expose what had happened. I'd done that. I had not come expecting a happily ever after, and I was right not to. Because the ring on that table was the same ring he'd slid across a different table a week ago, and the same hands that had put it down the first time now wanted to take it back. And that was a thing I was going to have to sit with for a long time. But the look on Diane's face when she'd been seen, when all her architecture had been laid out in plain view and she'd had nothing left to build behind, that stayed with me too. "We'll get everything sorted out," she'd said. The first time she'd said it with confidence. This time she didn't get to finish. Diane called Marcus 47 times in the 3 days following that dinner. 47. Claire told me this because Claire and I had, in the aftermath of all of it, developed a text thread that I'm keeping forever. She also posted on Facebook a vague, martyrdom-flavored status about doing what's right even when it costs you, that her friends responded to with sad reacts, presumably because none of them had context. Marcus's cousin Aaron, who I had met exactly once at a barbecue, sent me a private message saying, "I heard what happened, and I want you to know I believe you." I don't know how word had traveled to Aaron, but I wasn't asking questions. I simply said thank you. Marcus and I did not immediately get back together. I want to be clear about this because I think a different version of this story would have him sweep in with an apology grand enough to rewrite everything. And that's not what happened. What happened was slower and more complicated and involved several conversations, and one particularly long phone call where we both cried, which was deeply uncomfortable and probably necessary. The honest truth is this. Marcus had known his mother was controlling. He'd known it in the way you know something you've organized your whole life around not looking at directly. He'd let her make small jabs at me for 2 years. He'd filed them under "she's just old-fashioned," and "you two just need to communicate," because it was easier than confronting the thing he'd built his sense of safety around since he was a child. That's not excusable. I'm not excusing it. But it is explainable. An explanation is where I had to start if I was going to make any kind of peace with what came next. What came next was Marcus starting therapy. Actually starting it. Not, "I'll look into it," starting it. Weekly sessions with a therapist who specializes in enmeshment patterns, which is a term I did not know before this and now know more about than I ever expected. Claire recommended the therapist. Claire, I have decided, is a genuinely good person in an extremely difficult family situation, and I think about her a lot. Diane did not apologize. Not really. She sent me a text 2 weeks later that said, "I hope you know I only ever wanted what was best for Marcus and this family," which is technically the form of an apology without the substance of one. I didn't respond. I didn't block her. I just left it on read and let it be what it was. Carol and I have been talking more. Real talking, not the managed distance conversations we'd had for months. It's not fixed. Our relationship is like a piece of furniture that's been broken and glued and broken again, and the glue holds some places and doesn't others. But she showed up. At that table, in that dining room, in that blazer, she showed up. And I'm choosing to let that mean something. The joint savings account, the $14,200, I withdrew my half. $7,100. I put $4,000 toward a solo weekend trip to a city I'd always wanted to see and hadn't because Marcus wasn't interested. I bought very good shoes. I ate at a restaurant alone and ordered dessert and sat there and felt, for the first time in a while, like a person whose life belonged to herself. The ring is in a drawer in my apartment. Not gone. Just there. We're not engaged again. We're not together either. We are two people who went through something that broke things open, and we're taking it slowly, and slowly is the only pace I trust right now. My notes app log, by the way, the one I'd started keeping of what I actually said versus what Diane reported, I went back and read it a few weeks after everything. It's a meticulous little document. Dates, times, exact wording. Past me, apparently, knew something present me was refusing to acknowledge. Past me was not, as I'd thought, an idiot. Past me was actually paying attention the whole time and quietly building a case, even without knowing that's what she was doing. I think about that a lot. About how much we know before we know it. I'm not fully healed. I want to be honest about that because the version of this where I tell you I've done my inner work and arrived somewhere clean and resolved would be a lie. Some mornings I wake up and feel the weight of it. The specific weight of being betrayed by someone who smiled at you across a dinner table while she was burning down what you'd built. Some mornings I look at the ring in the drawer and I don't know what I want. But I wore the burgundy dress last week to a work dinner. A woman I'd just met across the table looked at it and said, "That color is incredible on you." And I thought, yeah, it really is. I'm going to be okay. Not because everything is fixed. Not because the people who hurt me have accounted for it properly. But because I'm still here. I picked up the ring box and put it in my purse and asked about the bread roll. And I went home, and I fell apart, and I got back up. And Diane called festive, and I've decided that's actually not an insult. Festive means full of something. It means bright. It means you walked into the room and you were noticeable. I think I can live with that.